Hi, I'm Gary Chariter from the Center for a Stateless Society. I'm here to tell you that advocates of freed markets should oppose capitalism. Now, defenders of freed markets have good reason to identify their position as a species of anti-capitalism. By freed markets here, I understand markets that are liberated, markets that don't have the state's involvement at all. To explain why this is the case, I distinguish three potential meanings of capitalism before suggesting that people committed to freed markets should oppose capitalism in my second and third senses. Then, I offer reasons for using capitalism to tag some of the social arrangements to which freed market advocates should object. We can begin by distinguishing three senses of capitalism. There are at least three different ways, three distinguishable senses in which we can use this word capitalism. Capitalism, one, can be defined as an economic system that features property rights and voluntary exchanges of goods and services. Capitalism, two, by contrast, we can use to mean an economic system that features a symbiotic relationship between big business and government. Capitalism, three, by contrast, means the rule of workplaces, of society, and if there is one, the state, by capitalists. That is, by a relatively small number of people who control investable wealth and the means of production. So three senses of capitalism: voluntary exchange, big business, big government cronyism, or rule by capitalists. Now, capitalism, one, just is a freed market. So if anti-capitalism meant opposition to capitalism, one, sure, free market anti-capitalism would be oxymoronic. But proponents of free market anti-capitalism aren't opposed to capitalism, one. Instead, they object either to capitalism, two, or if they're like me, to both capitalism, two, and capitalism, three. Many people seem to employ definitions that combine elements from these distinct senses of capitalism. Both enthusiasts for and critics of capitalism seem too often to mean by the word something like an economic system that features personal property rights and voluntary exchanges of goods and services, and therefore predictably also features rule by capitalists. But I think there is good reason to challenge the assumption that dominance by a small number of wealthy people is in any sense a likely feature of a genuinely freed market. Such dominance, I want to suggest, is probable only when force and fraud impede economic freedom. So now the question is, why are capitalism 2 and capitalism 3 inconsistent with freed market principles? And I think there are several reasons this is the case. So capitalism 2 and capitalism 3 are both inconsistent with freed market principles. Capitalism 2 because it involves direct interference with market freedom. Capitalism 3 because it depends on such interference, both past and ongoing, and because it flies in the face of the general commitment to freedom that underlies and I think makes intelligible support for market freedom in particular. So first of all, then, I think we want to say capitalism 2 involves direct interference with market freedom. Capitalism 2 is clearly inconsistent with capitalism 1, and so with a genuinely freed market. Under capitalism 2, politicians interfere with personal property rights and voluntary exchanges of goods and services in order to enrich themselves and their constituents. At the same time, under capitalism 2, big businesses influence politicians in order to foster interference with personal property rights and voluntary exchanges to enrich themselves and their allies. Pretty straightforward. It is also the case that capitalism 3 depends on past and ongoing interference with market freedom. There are three ways in which capitalism 3 might be understood to be inconsistent with capitalism 1, and so with a freed market. The first depends on a plausible, even if contestable, view of the operation of markets. Let's call this view Markets Undermine Privilege, or MUP. Sorry, that's not more elegant. According to MUP, in a freed market, absent the kinds of privileges afforded the usually well-connected beneficiaries of state power under capitalism too, wealth would be widely distributed and large hierarchical businesses would prove inefficient, and in fact, in that kind of environment, they wouldn't survive. Both because most people don't like working in hierarchical work environments, and because flatter, more nimble organizations would be much more viable than large, clunky ones without government support for big business, most people in a freed market would work, I think, as independent contractors or in partnerships or cooperatives. At any rate, far more would. There would be far fewer large businesses. Those that still existed wouldn't be as large as today's corporate behemoths, I think, and societal wealth would be widely dispersed among a vast number of small firms. Other kinds of privileges for the politically well-connected, privileges that tend to make and keep people poor, think about occupational licensure and zoning laws, for instance, as obvious examples, would be absent from a genuinely freed market. So ordinary people, even ones at the bottom of the economic ladder, would be more likely to enjoy a level of economic security than they do now. They would, in virtue of enjoying that level of economic security, be able to opt out of employment in unpleasant working environments, including big businesses. And because a free society wouldn't feature a government with the supposed right, much less the capacity, to interfere with personal property rights and voluntary exchanges, those who occupy the top of the social ladder in capitalism 3, the capitalists, wouldn't be able to manipulate politicians to gain and maintain wealth and power in a free market. So the ownership of the means of production wouldn't be concentrated, would certainly be much less likely to be concentrated in a few hands. In addition to ongoing interference with market freedom, MUP suggests that capitalism 3 wouldn't be possible without past acts of injustice on a grand scale. That is, the concentration of wealth and power that enables rule by capitalists is dependent not on their success in a competitive, genuinely freed market, but rather on vast dispossession of wealth that they've participated in and fostered and certainly benefited from. There is extensive evidence of massive interference with property rights and market freedom, interference that has led to the impoverishment of huge numbers of people in England, in the US, and elsewhere. Clearly, this is true throughout Latin America. Think about the latifundia system that obtains there. Freed market advocates should thus object to capitalism 3 because capitalists are able to rule only in virtue of large-scale, state-sanctioned, often state-involved violations of legitimate property rights. Support for capitalism 3 is inconsistent with support for the underlying logic of freedom. Capitalism 3 might be understood to be inconsistent with capitalism 1 in light of the underlying logic of support for free markets. Now, no doubt some people favor personal property rights and voluntary exchanges, capitalism 1, for their own sake, without trying to integrate support for capitalism 1 into a broader understanding of human life and social interaction. For others, however, support for capitalism 1 reflects an underlying principle of respect for personal autonomy and dignity. And the people who take this view, they're advocates of what I will call comprehensive liberty, want to see people free to develop and flourish as they choose in accordance with their own preferences, provided they don't aggress